be our closing song tonight. 438. Well, we're getting Andrew back in gear a little bit here anyway, getting tuned up. In the temple, they must have had a lot of percussion instruments, cymbals, and all of that. And I was reading about that apparently back like in the time of the church, that they'd go for the temple service, and then synagogues would meet outside. The musician would lead that, then go to the synagogues, and they'd sing maybe a cappella some and read the Bible mostly. But music was a very important part of the Old Testament people. We got thinking about it, they have 150 songs in the book. I don't know if they had more somewhere else, but you think they have a songbook of 150 songs. We got 600? Numbers go to that anyway. Think if you had 1/4 or whatever that would be of the amount we have in this book. And they're all written about the same time by David and his staff musicians. And so they sang the same songs for 1,500 years, more or less. Maybe 1,000 years, I guess you should say. Suppose they do them by then? Chuck doesn't need a book, and I suppose they did either by that time. Yeah, 23rd Psalm, yeah, 52, yeah, know all the numbers, 103, yeah. Got it all down. And they were well known for that. Well, just thinking about music and how important it is. Thursday we were privileged, I guess you'd say, to go to Des Moines and get motivated. You've been hearing that maybe at WHO, they had all these speakers come in, and we listened to different ones. General Powell, he talked about how we ought to get people motivated in education, and Laura Bush talked about how that no matter what people say about you, you keep going because you know who you are and who your husband is, all that silly thing that they're going to say in the paper and around you is not going to matter. Isn't that pretty sensible? Had 2 or 3 people that were talking about how to make money. All you have to do is just watch your computer and push a few buttons. 10 minutes a day, you can be a millionaire. This guy took $1,000 and in 5 years he's a millionaire. He can teach you how to do it. Go to a seminar. Maybe you can. Some do. I had one guy talking, sounded like we were in church. They started using language that didn't sound like church. Then he went back to church for a while. Then went out of church. And it was kind of interesting. Zig Ziglar was there. Many of you have heard of Zig Ziglar. He had fallen and he was suffering from vertigo and all of that, so he kind of sat there and his daughter interviewed him. They played a few clips of his past. Ziglar's 82, so he wasn't as bright as he was a few years back. But he had quite a bit to say. He was all charged up. And he was talking about the redhead, his wife. She was sitting there, been married 62 years. One that we did hear that I'm going to talk about a little bit tonight, at least by way of introduction, was Terry Bradshaw. Now, Terry Bradshaw didn't talk about marriage. He said that he had 2 daughters and they're both ugly because they looked like their mother, he said. Well, he'd been married and divorced 3 times, so I guess that's why he thought that way. In case you don't know who Terry Bradshaw is, he was the quarterback in the 70s, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They won Super Bowls, he won national championships, he was the most valuable player a time or 2. And probably as far as quarterbacks go and professionally, he was one of the all-time best quarterbacks that ever played football. And he was telling the story that he grew up in, or he was born, I guess, in Louisiana, and they moved up by Clinton, Iowa for a while. And he saw this helmet in the sports window that he thought was the most beautiful he ever had seen. It was old gold and black. It was Iowa. And he wanted to play for the Iowa Hawkeyes. He's like 8, 9-year-old kid, wanted to play for the Iowa Hawkeyes. That was his dream. And we're talking about one of the best quarterbacks ever played football. They wanted to play for the Hawkeyes. Well, his family moved back to Louisiana. And when he graduated from high school, he wrote whoever was the coach at that time in Iowa a letter that he would, if he couldn't get a scholarship, he'd just walk on and play football for Iowa. Now, probably that was Jerry Burns, or one of those back in those days when we had 19 losing seasons. If you remember those horrible days in the past, we won 3 games a year. We thought that was really doing pretty well in Iowa. They'd still come and watch him, but we were doing horrible. And here was Terry Bradshaw. Of course, they didn't know he was Terry Bradshaw, the quarterback that he became. But he was offering just to walk on to Iowa. But he didn't. Because Iowa coaches never even sent him a letter. They didn't even answer it. They didn't pay any attention to it. So Terry Bradshaw went to the Louisiana Tech University. An All-American when he graduated, #1 pick in 1970. And like they say, the rest is history. But you wonder what could have happened to Iowa football fortunes if they at least just noticed him. But they didn't. And I suppose that has gone into a lot of different sports stories, that here's somebody that they could have had and they paid no attention, and there was a great loss, it would seem, because you didn't notice that. And his main point was not how to have a happy marriage, because Zig Ziglar talked about being married 62 years, and you can see that Terry Bradshaw doesn't explain anything about that. In fact, he was married to a former his first wife was a former Miss America. So he married for beauty, I guess, and she married for money, and it didn't mix. So that was the first divorce that they had. But anyway, he was talking about going through when they didn't notice you and appreciate you, and when he got to the NFL, they said he was too dumb and stupid and didn't know anything, and he didn't pay any attention. He worked harder than anybody else, he said, just really tried to be what he could be, and with great natural ability, first of all, and great work ethic, he became a legend, so to speak. You think about that in the Bible. There are things that happen in the Bible we don't want to happen to us, where somebody bypassed a great opportunity. They could have gone to the promised land 38 years before they did, if they just listened to the spies. But they discounted it. They didn't think it was right. They said, we're not going to be able to make it. And so because they didn't take advantage of an opportunity, they wandered about and wandered about and wandered about until they all died. Jesus looked over Jerusalem one time after he preached a hot sermon to the public, or to the Pharisees and the scribes and all of them, and he looked and he said, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, I would have gathered you together under me as a hen gathers her chicks." But you remember what the sad words were? But you would not. So he said, your house is left desolate. He was looking down upon this village, this town, that was bustling with a lot of activity, a lot of people working, and homes, and little kids running home in the dark of the night. But he knew that one day, not very long from then, 40 years, that this city would be absolutely destroyed. Houses burned, the walls down flat, the temple ruined. He could see that coming, and the reason was because he was offering himself to be the Savior, deliverer, and they wouldn't take it. What a difference it would have made, maybe, if they had said, we'll accept Christ as our Redeemer. Nazareth had the same thing. Jesus grew up in Nazareth. Everybody knew it. He was a carpenter's son. Then he became the carpenter. And I'm guessing, we don't know, but the general consensus is that Joseph died somewhere in Jesus' 20s, and so Jesus took over the shop. It was Joseph the carpenter and Jesus the carpenter's son, and pretty soon it was just Jesus. Kind of like Joseph and son, and now it's just the son that's left. And he was well known as the carpenter. If you want something made good, have Jesus do it. If you want something that's really great, he'd make it. And he's such a wonderful person. They couldn't put their finger on, but he was just a dedicated carpenter, and pretty much that was all he did. And he went down to the synagogue, I'm sure every Saturday, like all the rest of them did, for that was his custom. He took his turn in rotation. He got it, he read scripture to him, just like all the rest of them did. Then we got 30 years of age, he left home. And he went down to John the Baptist and told John to baptize him, and John did, and Jesus received the Holy Spirit in the form of a dove, and then he began a mini ministry, and just in a few months, he was home again. And the whole town turned out, you remember. They turned out to see this fellow that had grown up in our city, and now seemingly is fairly famous. What's it all about? And sitting row after row, or how they sat in that synagogue, were friends and people he'd made things for. Relatives, people that he had known, people he'd gone to maybe synagogue school with or whatever. People that he'd helped in different ways just as a kid. They began to read the scripture. Today, the scripture is fulfilled in your ears. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach the gospel to the poor. And on he went, and they were getting irritated. He's reading that like it belongs to him. And then he said, you know, the truth is that a prophet has no honor in his own country. Other places will accept, and they were getting so mad that they didn't listen anymore. They rose up and grabbed him and were pulling him through the crowd over to a brow of the hill upon which the city was built to throw him over the hill to his death. Jesus just passed through there. Now, they would have had a great opportunity. So Jesus moved his headquarters from Nazareth, he's just dangerous, to Capernaum. But it says at Capernaum that not many mighty deeds were done in either Nazareth or Capernaum because they wouldn't accept him. Think of all that they could have had. Think of all the people who could have been helped. All the sick folks could have been healed, but they didn't believe in him, and so they bypassed him and didn't receive the blessing. Ignoring Jesus is a horrible thing, and they faced that in their life as well. There were a few other stories in the Bible that they really didn't miss, but they almost did. It's kind of interesting. A little boy, well, not a little boy, probably 17, someone in that neighborhood walks up, and everybody is in a line over against another army that's across the valley in another line, looking at each other, yelling. They had a battle cry. It says they were yelling the battle cry. Now, nobody was fighting, because on the other side there was a big giant standing there, 10 foot tall, and he said, "Send me a man to fight." He said that for 40 days, 40 nights. Now, can you imagine every day you get up, get your armor on, you run down to this place, you sit there and yell at the other team, sort of like it, and, "Whoa, we're going to win," and you don't ever engage the other army. And David said, "Well, what is going on here?" Well, that guy is so big, he's challenged us to a contest, and nobody is as big as he is. Nobody can challenge him, and David said, "Well, I will." And they about overlooked him, didn't they? His brothers said, "You better go home. Why are you here anyway? You're a naughty kid. You better go and take care of your sheep. You just came to see the battle." And David said, "Well, why get all over my case?" And the more I thought about that, you know, it is so true that the people we can be the meanest to are the people closest to us. You ever notice that? We wouldn't dare tell a stranger that. We wouldn't dare tell a friend that, probably. If we didn't know the person, we wouldn't say things like that. But if it's our husband or our wife or our kids or mom or dad, we'll just tell them off. Horribly. Isn't that kind of human nature? "You're not another kid, what do you do?" No, nobody else said that. They're both looking at him like, "I don't know about this kid." They weren't saying much. They just kind of being cool about it, but not he lived. And somebody told Saul. And Saul said, "Well, you can't go because you're just a stripling. You're just a young person, and you've never fought before." And, you know, they're going to say, "Forget it." Well, what if they never let David go to the battlefield? Well, if they said, "No, you can't go. It don't look like you'd ever be a man that would do anything, or boy, or whatever. You just better go home, and we'll let the real men handle this." But they didn't have a real man, and the whole army didn't seem like. Finally, I think Saul, just to get it off a dead center, said, "You go, and may the Lord be with you." I think they're packing up their stuff. I think they're tying their shoelaces. Because we're going to have to run a little bit, because he's probably going to get killed. We've got to get out of here. But at least we made an attempt. I honestly don't think that Saul had very much faith in David. But David said, "I've killed a bear, and I've killed a lion, and I'll kill him too." Isn't that way 16, 17-year-old kids talk? "I can do it, don't worry about me, I've got it all." Yeah, there's another teenager for you. He wasn't like that. That wasn't what he was. He had confidence in God, knew where he was. He was saying the right thing, and of course he killed Goliath. But they almost missed him. Like, he can't do it. We don't want to look down on a situation and say, "Well, that's no possibility," when God has things going. Saul was the same thing, or Paul, we would call him. He was on the ship going toward Rome. It looked like they were going to all wreck. The sailors were going to get off in the lifeboats and get away. And a guy said, "Don't do that." They thought, "Well, who's he?" But they learned, hadn't they? He was the same guy who said, "I know the sun is shining, and I know the sea is calm, but if we get in this ship and we take out, we will have an awful storm and we'll have a shipwreck." They said, "What do you know about it?" How many preachers do you know much about sailing? I don't know very many. Because Brother Word had a boat. Maybe some other people do too. But why would you, if you're a seasoned sailor and you're the pilot of a ship and you sail the Mediterranean all the time, and some preacher tells you ought not to go, you're going to listen to him. And they didn't. And they got in a storm, didn't they? But fortunately, God was still merciful to them, and now the second time around, or the third time around, they started listening to this preacher, not because he was a preacher or because he was smart, but because God was with him. If they had said, forget him, they and the ship and all would have probably gone down, but God was blessing them. Moses, it was said in Acts 7, Stephen's sermon, some guy said, well, who made you to be the Lord over us? Well, what if they did not have Moses? Well, they said, Moses, we're not listening to you. Just go back to Jethro and whatever and take care of his sheep and just forget it. You're 80 years old. You haven't been here you don't know much about Egypt anymore. You're an old timer. Your day is long past. Just forget you know anything anyway. The king won't listen to you. It's hopeless. Just chuck it and go home. But that's not the way it turned out. But some of the people had the idea, forget him. And what if they had? Well, they'd still be making bricks maybe. They'd still be putting up some new structure for the king, I suppose. Maybe somebody else would have come along. Well, they almost missed. And some people did miss totally. I want to talk about three things tonight that I think are really important. We don't overlook these. We see in the Bible, some people missed out a great opportunity. We see some that almost did. We don't want to be like that. We don't want to be like the Iowa Hawkeyes, and here we've got a Terry Bradshaw we could get, and we don't do anything about it. We have great potential, but we don't want to develop it. And in three ways. First of all, the kids. Yeah, I said kids. We don't want to overlook the potential that is in kids. When a church starts overlooking potential in kids, and kids are a bother, and kids are too much, and they cost too much, and they cause too much trouble, and they're too noisy, and they're this and they're that, well, you just won't get the shovel out because the church is going to be buried in a little bit of time. These kids are that important. When the people in Israel said, well, we can't go, and we're all going to die, and our children, you know, little Johnny, he's 6, he'll die here, and there's Susie, she's 12, and she'll die here, and then we feel so bad about it, and they'll never grow up. You know what God said? I'll tell you one thing. You're the ones going to die, but little Johnny and little Susie are going to the promised land. That's what I'm telling you, God said. And they did. The 20 and older died, and the 20 and down, that's the ones God worked at. Isn't that amazing? God picked the kids over the adults, actually. And not that he has a favorite, but he just knew that they hadn't sinned like those adults, and they're a little more workable, a little more moldable. And adults kind of have their ways. It was interesting to me, I guess, at the Central Rally to watch adults try to fit into a camp schedule that they're not used to. We're going to do what? It's not the way we Bible drill. No, that's not. No, that's not the way camp goes. Camp goes when it's time to do it, they'll do it. Well, there are people I've argued with you, but I mean, kids are far easier to, here's what's going to happen next, and they do it. Line up, they'll line up. You say line up at camp, say for a rally, and you get some kids, and an adult or two, the other adults are waiting there. I'll just wait till the line goes down. I'm not going to line up. What are you talking about? You can tell me it's just amazing how that kind of goes. The Lord knew he could work with those, and he certainly did, and hopefully we can do the same thing. You realize that we have great potential. Here in this area, we had about 30 kids usually on a Wednesday night starting out. Hopefully we'll have more. But there's potential. And I was sitting there, I guess, maybe when we were going on to Des Moines, we were talking about it, and I was going in my mind through all the kids. I picked them up, my red van as I picked them up, just mentally. And I was thinking, outside of maybe the Steens, there is not, that I pick up on the van, there's not another kid that comes from an intact family. They live with just their mom or their dad, or they live with moms and dads that aren't their moms and dads, or they live with some other grandparent or somebody else. This is the story of Bolton to a great extent. It's a story of America to a great extent. And you know, that just the intact family where you got support, and you know where you're going to be, and you're not going to be hustled off on a weekend back to dad or mom, or summer dad and mom because you never see them any other time. It's an amazing thing to find in our little town where you've got moms and dads there all the time, and it's the original moms and dads. We have some that have mixed up every little bit. There's a few houses in town. It's almost a joke, but it isn't funny. Well, I wonder who's going to be in that house next time we run the van around town. I wonder what man will be there with that woman next time we run the van around town. Then you wonder why kids have problems. If kids need anything, you know what they need? They need us to help them to understand how life is lived, that they can actually find what life is about. When Derek Howashee, remember him, was invited by the Hunts when he was in school to come and eat a meal, he got there and said, I have never done this before. Derek was 20, I don't know what then, 24, 5, 6, 7, maybe. He was a lot older than he looked. The kids thought he was some Indian off the reservation because he looked really young and he was in India. But he'd been in the Navy and he'd been around the world and he saw things that those kids hadn't even heard of yet. He didn't talk about it, but Derek had been around the world and he battled alcoholism and other things, and he'd had quite a past, and he had become a Christian now. But he said, you know, in all his experience, I have never before sat down in a family setting and had a meal. He didn't do it when he was growing up. He hadn't had it anywhere else. When he sat down at Brother Hunt and Margaret's table and ate like you're used to doing, that was the first time in his life he sat down like a normal family eating a meal. You know, there's a lack of stability when those things aren't part of your life, and families are not together, and you don't know what's going to happen, and you're all uncertain. And we know that God has made a family to draw together and make that. We are important to fashioning something for these people that are growing up to have as their life. Don't say, well, kids don't matter, or kids are noisy. I know they are. Kids do rude things. Yeah, they do. Kids cost money. Yeah, they do. They don't put much money in the offering. That's true. You have to bake cookies for them. That takes some work. Or cook some hot dogs or whatever, and they might not even say thank you. So what? Don't overlook the potential. I think of people that, you know, have been here or we've touched, maybe through camp. We were eating in Ottumwa, and this waitress took our order, and she came back. And I know you. You're from camp. Yeah. Well, I thought that's who it was. Then she saw all the rest of us, Tim and Jeff and Becky and all those, and so she ought to recognize, yeah, there's the cook, and you know, and she was one of the Scully girls that had been to camp years ago, and I don't know if she even goes to church or anything, even went to church then. Oh, that was great. Oh, how wonderful camp was. It hasn't died out. There's still something that you're working and cultivating in a heart, and she was just tickled to death. We were at the park when the little boys were here a couple weekends ago, and this boy walked up and said, you're the chief of the camp, aren't you? So she said, well, yeah. He said, remember, we were there last year, and some of the Wagglers and some of those that come from Bloomfield, one of those group of those kids came up, and he just talked my leg off. Then Dad came, we got a whole bunch more coming next year. We just love this. Well, it's important, isn't it? You're doing something to put something in the heart of young people that when they get old, you hope that they'll serve God and have right kind of ideals and right kind of lifestyle. Because you and I sometimes are the only people that they really see normality in. Everything else is really, really hectic. You think of different ones. You think of the Murdy kids. You know, I just see Richard, just as clear as it was yesterday, taking Holly's hand. Holly could hardly walk. She was so little. And walking up the old sidewalk. He was taking care of her. And the folks never did come, but they came, and they came all those years. Well, where are they today? Well, they're not here. We wish they were, but they're still in church. They're still serving the Lord. Both of them married, have children, passing on, we trust, the faith, the next generation. That's really important, isn't it? We don't overlook the old kids. Who cares? Who cares? We care. We ought to care. They're a priority. They're really important that we would do something about them. And we see people who have had some real problems. I think of people we've had at school before, college age now, going to kick them out. Really, just not with it, not going to do very good. And of course, Brother Hunt would always say, well, I give them a second chance. And I didn't always think you ought to do that. Oh, okay. And I can tell you some success stories that today they're really doing well. But at that time, you wonder. Don't give up. Just realize we've got to have patience and love and concern, because it's really important that we do what we can for our younger generation. And we've seen people, like we say, grow up in the church here and have their faith and develop their faith. And some teens that we've had have had some bumpy rides every now and then. But the good thing is that somebody loved them. And I've often thought Charlie and Jeanette did so much for Elena when she was just a teenager. And they could see the value of what she could become and kind of like adopted her in a way. Now you can do the same thing. And I know some of you have. Befriend somebody. There are some kids that they don't really have anything normal in their life, but you could be that normal thing. Don't discount it. Don't be saying, well, that's a kid. That might be Terry Bradshaw spiritually. That might be the next preacher that we're needing. That might be the next elder. That may be the next person who will really do something for God. How do you know? You don't know. There's a revival meeting, and the guy wrote, there was just one baptism, and he was only 12 years old. Turned out to be a guy named J.W. McGarvey, who wrote more Bible books and knew more Bible than most anybody ever was. But I told the preacher, thought that's kind of a downer. Just one little 12-year-old kid, and that wasn't much. I mean, you just produced something that really probably blessed millions of people. Who knows? Don't overlook it. There might be a potential spiritual giant in that kid. Look at them. Now, so what can they be? There's something God created. There's something God can use. Number two, don't overlook your neighbors, your friends, and workers around you that you think aren't worth anything. Oh, they're just sinners. Bad news. They cuss a lot. They drink all the time. No. The night of our Friday night after Dave Tyree got done his lesson, Jeff said, well, why don't we just introduce ourselves, since we all kind of knew each other, I guess, in a way, except maybe one or two. But so Jack started in, Jack Langford. Well, he talked about 20 minutes, and so everybody else talked quite a bit. And it was, I think that was 9, we got about 10:30 when we finally got done telling who we were. You can imagine a bunch of men telling all that stuff. But, and so Jack talks about, when his 8-year-old son was run over by a school bus. Wow. That's what opened his eyes that life was pretty short. But here was Jack Langford at one time, just old Jack Langford, who was bordering on atheism, didn't need God. If Jack Langford had been your neighbor, you'd say, he'll never be in church. There's no hope for him. Old Jack, he thinks he knows everything. I thought that. But then God did something or allowed something to happen that totally changed Jack Langford around. And now Jack loves the Lord and is a real ambassador of truth for Christ. One told that he was so despondent that he was putting a bullet in his gun to commit suicide. But he was so drunk he couldn't get the bullet in. So that's why he's still alive. Now, if you had a neighbor like that was so drunk, you'd say, there's no hope. There's no hope for him. What could he become? Drunk? But, through different things that happened to his life, he was introduced to people that loved him and began to teach him the gospel, invite to church. He said, well, nothing else going on. Well, now just go to church. Some people go to church just because they're bored, That's kind of hard to imagine. You go to church all the time because you get bored in church. But then people actually go to church because they're bored. Something to do. And he started and it wasn't half bad. It was kind of interesting and kind of opened the door and became a Christian. There are people like that probably around us. There's some people in Moulton that you'd write down that person would never become a Christian. That would be your estimation. You might be surprised. I know that person. Maybe a Centerville, the same thing. Every town probably has them. Now that person, that lady, that man, they will never ever do anything spiritually. They are just, don't ever think that. There might be a potential somebody that you're overlooking. What did they say when Jesus started talking to Zacchaeus? Did they like that? Zacchaeus, that ripoff? Don't you know that he's a publican? What is Jesus thinking? Going to his house. Oh, they mumbled, they grumbled, didn't they? Thought that was horrible. Who would have thought that Jesus would make an announcement, Zacchaeus has just been saved? Of course, he was a Jew, he got back on the track was the idea. And he's going to pay you back for anything he ripped you off. Really? You ever heard of a guy like that want to pay you back that he cheated you out of? And then when he gets all done, and not only pay you back 4 times. And not only that, but he's going to give half of what's left in alms to the needy. Would you ever guess that's what Zacchaeus would have turned into? No! Little old publican. He's no good. He's a cheat. Have no spiritual attitudes or qualities. Forget it. No, Zacchaeus has become the song of young children. Wee little man, got up in the tree. Come on down, go into your house. What a change, but they didn't think that was going to happen. And what about the Apostle Paul? Were the Christians thinking, I just know that someday he's going to be the great evangelist? You think when they sat around in the church sometimes, I can just hardly wait till Paul starts preaching the gospel? It's like some of those around the circle. If somebody said, I was going to be a Christian, one said, or somebody was going to be a preacher, I'd have said, you are absolutely crazy. Farthest thing from the person's mind at one time. Paul's going to be a Christian. That's stretching it. He's going to be a great preacher. That's really stretching it. He's going to write half the New Testament. Oh man, what's the matter with you? You really had it. We did all that. And even the man that baptized him couldn't believe it. Baptized Saul. You're probably wrestling. No, he's all right. He's got his life straightened out as far as his attitude. He needs to complete what he's working on. He needs to be saved, and you need to go do this for him. And, well, are you sure? Yeah. The Lord said, I even told him your name. You're the guy to do it. Really? Can you imagine? Are all the Sauls converted? Are all the Zacchaeuses in the church by now? I don't think so. We sing the song that I'm touched down in the human heart, wakened by kindness, chords will vibrate the broken will vibrate once more. Touched by a loving heart, wakened by kindness. Like that can happen through a Christian reaching out to that individual. The Bible even says in Acts 2 that some of the priests became obedient to the gospel. So the very people that put Jesus on the cross became Christians in time. Don't miss it. Be a witness. Be a good example. Treat people kindly. The person you snub today might be the person you should be witnessing to tomorrow. Do you ever realize that? So don't say, I'll just be a kind of a horrible Christian, a horrible example. I'll just be curt and nasty because they're no good anyway. You just better be the best person you can to every person you know, because maybe tomorrow that's the person where you say, you need to, her. Dan was talking about in one of our mid-session that back in Sacramento, there's this lady that he didn't like. I think she maybe was related to somebody in the church and left her husband and went to homosexual relationship, lesbian, and he just didn't have any use for her. Then she called him, she wanted to be taught the gospel. He didn't want to do that either. She left her lesbian lifestyle, and she was baptized into Christ. But she said, I got to tell you one thing. When he started, she said, I have AIDS. And she had baked some cookies and had some coffee. Before you eat the cookies and coffee, I want you to know that I have AIDS. He said, I ate the cookies and drank the coffee. That's a little bit before probably knew how AIDS was passed, but that'd be quite and all the church was, you better take a test, you better get examined for, and then she became a Christian. The church says, well, what are we going to do about communion? What if she takes half of a communion cup and somebody else drinks the other half? Then what? It's a hard thing, isn't it? But here is almost an impossible situation, you think, that came through. I think she's passed away of AIDS since, in some years back. Can that happen? Can people that are the lowest come to Christ? Yeah. Are you ready for it? Or are you going to throw a Terry Bradshaw away just because he doesn't fit into who we think and what we want? And finally, number 3, don't discount each other. Where are we going to get leaders and teachers and that kind of thing? Well, right here. We don't have to really import them necessarily. We've got them here. But they're just not developed yet. Right? People that can do a lot of things, where? They're right here. Where's the money that you'll need for certain campaigns? Right here. Where's the power? It's right here. Well, we could get more people. But I mean, you know, the Lord generally could find what he needed among the people that he had. Don't discount it. There are some people here that will grow and become better than they are today and become notable. Remember when they looked down upon little John Mark? John Mark went home. He didn't go on the first trip all the way. He backed out on us. He ran home. He's no good. We can't count on him. John Mark will never do anything, some said. And even Paul was kind of in that camp a little bit. I can't trust him. He'll not go on trip 2. Barnabas said, but I think he's got potential. I think John Mark can do something. And John Mark turned out great, didn't he? Great companion to Barnabas. Later, Paul said, I could use him. Wrote the Gospel of Mark. I mean, you have to be pretty good to write one of the Gospels, you know. For a kid that they said had no potential and was a coward and no good, he turned out pretty good. Because the Lord can take our failures and make us into something that he can really use. Where's the potential? Well, it's here. All we have to do is let the Lord use it. Well, who's going to win souls? You can. Who can do all these things? Well, you can. Me? Yeah, me. You're the John Mark that can develop. I said, well, I don't know about that. Well, listen on. What about Peter? If you look at Peter at a certain stage in his life, do you think he had much potential? Couldn't keep his mouth shut. Didn't seem to have much faith. Kept sinking in the water. Forget him. He's a dropout. He will never make it. But did he? Oh, yeah. Peter came along just fine because the Lord used him. And it took a while. And people will develop overnight. But there's potential that you don't see in the present church. It's there. We just let God use it. Gideon was just a young man threshing grain behind the barn, so to speak, so it wouldn't be stolen by the enemy. And guess what? An angel said, Gideon, you're a mighty man of valor. He wasn't then, but the angel was predicting what he would become. Mighty man of valor. You're going to lead the army. You're going to drive the Midian. I'm not going to drive any such thing anywhere. The Midianites have so many tents, and you look down in the valley where they camp, it looks like a whole host of grasshoppers. I mean, it's just covered totally. We have very few. And God could laugh and said, you don't know how few. It will take 300. We didn't take 300. God didn't want 300, but he wanted some, you know. He could have done it with 3 or 1 or an angel. God's unlimited. But he talked him into it. Gideon said, well, all right, I don't think I can do this thing. But he took some steps, and guess what? We have Gideon being astounding to us, an astounding man of faith. Don't discount the Terry Bradshaws that sit in church. That could be more than they are and greater than they are and will be greater than they are someday. Because God's going to use them in a different way than they have ever thought. And who thought Luke? Supposedly. Dr. Luke, when he was picked up there at Troas to tag along with Paul and Silas and the rest of them. Didn't get beat up, didn't go to jail, didn't sing in the midnight. He was sitting somewhere else, probably praying for him. He just kind of a helper, just kind of second stringer. Who would have thought that Luke would become, again, a writer of one of our New Testament books? Do you think that would be the potential that he had? He said, well, he's a doctor. He's got a lot of training. And there are a lot of people that have training. There are people that have good minds. They've got college degrees or they've got a lot of education. Now God can use that too. We don't have to say, well, he just uses people who don't have. He can use all these. Sometimes God uses people with great ability and uses them a certain way. And sometimes some of us that are rather ordinary, he's got something for us too. But don't discount it. But Terry Bradshaw will say, oh, I'd like to be on the team. And the team says, but you don't count. You have no potential. You're nothing. Don't let that happen spiritually. I just remind you, the kids are important. I remind you that the lost about us have potential. I remind you that we have potential. When God gets hold of our lives, we can do some astounding things too. So don't overlook the things that God has before us. And don't discount yourself as being one of them. Our closing song, 438. Search me, God, know my heart. Help me, cleanse me, get me ready for whatever your service is. This kind of dedication is what we need to the service of our God. 438. Let's stand as we sing this first stanza. Search